It's time for the Double Stop with Brian Sword.
Welcome to the Double Stop Podcast. I'm Brian Sword, and this is Steve Stevens. The song is from the flamenco guitar album he did in the late 90s, Flamenco A Go-Go. And for me, it represents Steve in general. He's been in the public eye for 30 years, and the funny thing about it is that besides his music, at least I knew very little about him. And as you'll hear in this interview, the assumptions I did make were pretty much wrong. Steve's not completely what you'd expect. Like, he didn't start out as a rocker, he started out playing folk songs on a nylon string acoustic. And after finding huge success in the 80s with Billy Idol, it is only now that he's found the same level of musical satisfaction. This week is the story of Steve Stevens, an artist who after 30 years has finally come full circle to how it all began.
Originally, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and my parents moved to Rockaway Beach when I was about 2.5 years old. So born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens. And there was nobody in my family at all who had any musical abilities anywhere. But my mom's father was a real, spark plug. I mean, he was the first one up to dance and sing and carry on, and if he could have played an instrument, he would have been the guy, So I think everybody, he just loved music and arts and theater, and he was the real matriarch of the family. So, there was a love of music in my family.
What was your first instrument?
Yeah, when I was 7.5, my dad brought home, I remember he paid $14 for a package, a nylon string guitar with a music book, and there was a folk singer named Burl Ives who, my dad liked all those kind of traditional American folk songs, and so for $14 he got himself the Burl Ives kit, and I have a brother who's 5 years older than me, so this is pretty much 1960, 67, and all my brother's friends are playing guitar and going down to the beach at night where everyone played guitar, and so I just think I picked up the guitar and took it out of my dad's bedroom, and it kind of stayed in mine as a way to hang out with my brother. That's really all I wanted to do. So, but in my neighborhood, there was a really famous protest singer named Phil Oakes, and he came from Rockaway, and when he was like our local legend, a local hero, so much so that my first Cub Scout troop, the den mother got expelled for teaching us how to sing Phil Oakes protest songs. So
awesome.
Yeah, so I learned early on that the guitar was a dangerous instrument.
And how old would you have been around then?
So yeah, got the guitar when I was 7.5, and then by the time I was about 8.5, or maybe 8, Phil Oakes' sister Sonny became my first guitar teacher. And that was just around the time that, the folk music thing was just massive with, Simon and Garfunkel and James Taylor, Joni Mitchell, and then Crosby, Stills, Nash, and the whole folk singer-songwriter thing had become massive. So I was right into all of that.
And so you were choosing teaching a bunch of folk songs.
Yeah, initially, yeah. And I didn't get an electric guitar till I was 13, so that whole time was spent playing folk and then classical and flamenco.
Oh, wow. And when you switched over to an electric, did you find it, super easy compared to the nylon string?
Well, I found it easy to annoy people more because suddenly I had volume.
Yeah.
All right, now I can really drive my parents nuts. And for my 13th birthday, I got a Univox little amplifier, a fuzz pedal, an electro-harmonic fuzz pedal, and a Univox clear guitar. And I think one of the first things I learned was like Satisfaction by the Stones, and then Purple Haze. Anything that had a fuzz box on it, I was all over it.
And were you one of those kids who just spent hours and hours every day obsessed with it, or did you kind of play around for a few years before you really got into it?
No, I was crazy about the
Yeah.
guitar from the get-go. When I was a little kid, so I wasn't particularly good at basketball. I liked sports and stuff, but in New York we played handball. That was our thing. We had a handball court down at the end of my street, and that was our social scene. So really, I just the guitar was a way for me to kind of, I guess, express myself and make some noise. And it was just the perfect time for a kid to learn guitar because there's like the early English 70s rock scene is happening, and there's so many great guitar players, and it was just like an endless stream of inspiration coming across.
And were there a few that really stood out to you that were the prime inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Led Zeppelin was huge. I remember when I played my first gig, I was 13, and I had to have my brother's roommate at college. We went to see him at home, and he taught me a lot of songs off Led Zeppelin 2, and then after that, I was just hooked on Led Zeppelin stuff. And then there was a really fine radio station in New York, WNEW FM, and the DJ, Scott Muni, every Friday would play. He had a 3-hour show called Things from England, and he'd play all the English imports. And that's the first time I heard Yes and Genesis and even more, all the obscure prog, what we now call prog rock. And there was a department store nearby my house that had the most incredible import section. I think the LPs cost like $3.99 or something, and I'd buy these English import records and just wear the grooves out on them.
And did you learn to play by ear? Could you play along with the records?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of learned that early on, although what really mattered, I guess, to me was that those English prog guitar players were encompassing all styles of guitar, and that's what really hooked me when I heard Steve Howe from Yes, and I got that Yes Fragile record, and there's classical bits on it, and jazz, and psychedelic, and every style of guitar, sometimes within one song. And these were all the styles that I had already learned how to play, but never knew anyone who was doing them all in a rock context. Howe played, folk guitar and ragtime, and so I remember the first time, in my household, we shared music. My dad was, although he never played an instrument, he just loved music, and he took me to see like Dave Brubeck and stuff, and I played him, Yes record for the first time, and my dad flipped out. He was like, "That guitar player is incredible."
Oh, that's great.
And he could relate to it all, and as I learned later that Howe was influenced by Les Paul and all these kind of guitar players that my dad was a fan of. So it was a really good way. And I remember my first guitar teacher was a real jazz head. He loved like Wes Montgomery and George Benson, and I brought him like the Yes album, and I said, can you teach me these things? And I came back the next week. He said, "Who is this guitar player?" He said, "This guy's incredible." And I said, "Yeah, this is new. This isn't the new rock thing. This is prog rock, And so I had a great, teacher by then, and he helped me get into the high school performing arts, which was the Fame School.
All right.
So so that was like my first exposure into Manhattan and the kind of music scene that was just starting in Manhattan, because where I lived in Rockaway was an hour and a half by train outside of New York. So really, really perfect time to learn how to play guitar.
And that school, what did that really give you? Because it must have meant a lot for you to commute 3 hours a day.
Yeah, I mean, what happened was that I got admitted into the school on guitar, and then they proceeded to tell me that, well, the guitar is not it's not an instrument in the orchestra.
Oh.
I went, yeah, and they said, well, now you have to learn another instrument that's part of the orchestra. And I tried viola, but I was like, well, that's not why I came to this school. So at the beginning of my second year, I had a student friend of mine who was like the hip kid in school. He lived in Manhattan, and his dad was a Broadway actor. And he said, have you ever heard of the Mercer Arts Center? I was like, no, what's that? And he said, well, that's this club that all these bands are playing at. He goes, you should stay after school. We'll hang out in the city, and we'll go down to Mercer Arts Center. I know the guy. We'll get in, even though we were underage. And we went in, and I think it was either the first or the second time being there that I saw Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers, and some of the other kind of alt rock bands that were starting, Television and Tom Verlaine with Television, and I remember it blew my mind. I went, wow, that's my education. That's and I came home and I told my parents that I was dropping out of high school, and they flipped.
Yeah.
That didn't go down too well. So I said, all right, I'll try another. Give me another 4 months, see if I can apply myself and get something out of this. And by then I had joined a cover band, and had started to play in the evening. So I was doing this trek into the city, and then going out to Queens to play in this cover band, and we were starting to get booked. Even though I was, they had to sneak me in because I was still underage, and we started playing that same scene with Twisted Sister and what was the other band, White Lion or Zebra. So we were on that Long Island, cover band scene. And I was just, I couldn't keep my eyes open. We'd finish unpacking our truck, and I'd get back home at 5 in the morning, and then barely get an hour and a half sleep on the train, and and I was sleeping through my classes and stuff, and so I started cutting school and stuff, and then I just told my parents, look, I'm never going to graduate this way because I'm failing everything, but I'm not going to stop playing in the clubs. I'm learning so much. And so my parents had the drummer of the band I was in, who was like 3 years older than me, come to the house. And basically they made him promise that he'd watch over me and make sure I didn't get into any trouble. Little did they know what was to come. And I agreed to get my GED. So I moved out of my parents' house at 17 and a half, and lived with the drummer, and I got my GED. During the day I'd go and get my GED class, and then we started to play pretty regularly, and by that summer we were doing 5 shows a week.
Oh, wow. And was that back in the time that you could actually make a pretty good living playing cover bands?
Yeah, we did really well. I mean, we were able to afford a quadraphonic PA system, and we played like all of Close to the Edge. I mean, we were like this crazy. Back then, people would sit through cover bands and stuff, and we, there was an audience for it. That scene in New York. I mean, if you know anything about Twisted Sister's history, they'd pack in 3,000 people a night doing covers, and they were playing 5-6 nights a week.
And did you do a lot of shows with them?
I did, actually. I did shows with them and the Plasmatics, and a lot of those musicians from that cover band scene went on to become pretty recognizable. Alan Childs became the keyboard player for Billy Squier. One of the guys who was in a band called Swift Kick, is now the musical director for like Shakira and a lot of pop stuff. Actually Rihanna, he was the musical director for Rihanna for a while. Tony Bruno is his name. So there was a lot of good musicians coming out of that because the training that you played 3 sets a night, 45-minute sets, and you could, you could learn all your favorite music, and you got to understand the inner workings of these great songs and what made them great,
And you learned how to perform.
Yeah, and you learn how to perform as well.
Connect to an audience and everything. Yeah, for sure. So you're 17.
Yeah.
You're 17. You're in a cover band. How long did that last? And that's really your education. How many years did you spend doing that before you started doing original?
Yeah, I think I did that for almost 2 years, and then there was this one guy who used to come see us, and he was like my biggest fan, and he was kind of a hip guy, and he called me Duracell. He'd say, "Yeah, man, you got Duracells in your fingers." He didn't know my name, just called me Duracell. And one day he bought me a drink and said, "Man, you got to get out of this scene because you got to go to New York and play your own music. You got to go to Manhattan. That's where you're going to make it. You're not going to make it out here." And that was I knew that in my heart because I had already seen the New York clubs, but I was so happy, doing the cover band thing and making money and having an audience, and it was really hard. But I stepped away from that band. I left the band, and then started answering ads in the Village Voice, looking for guitarists, and eventually I met a bunch of guys who lived in a loft on 30th Street. There was a music building there, and these guys were Army brats. Originally from Clarksville, Tennessee, and I joined the band, and they weren't happy with their singer, so I said, "You should check out the singer that was in my cover band." So I had him come down. So the two of us left the cover band and joined this band called the Fine Malibus, and we gigged around. We played the New York clubs. There was a lot of, other than because we weren't really a punk band, by that time. We sort of had a bit of a punk image, but I still had the hard rock edge to me, and loved by then Van Halen had come out, and I was just awestruck with Eddie Van Halen's guitar playing, and so we didn't quite fit in, but eventually we got signed to Island Records for a deal to do an album, and the producer was Jimmy Miller, who had produced all the classic Rolling Stones records. And they shipped us off down to Compass Point in the Bahamas, which was a famous recording studio. And we were the first band in to Compass Point right when AC/DC had just left. They had just done Back in Black. So the assistant engineer, I said, "Oh, who's been in here?" We literally just got off the plane, and the engineer plays me the roughs from Back in Black. And I went, "Oh, man, we're going to sound great." Little did I know it had nothing to do with the studio. It had everything to do with AC/DC and Mutt Lange.
Oh, sure.
And our record, what was to be our record, ended up being shelved, and it was an ill-fated first attempt,
And you were, 21 around then?
Exactly. Yep.
And
21.
You're 21. You're signed to a label that gets shelved. Like, do you dust off and keep on going, or were you pretty much devastated?
We were devastated. We were heartbroken, and because every step of the way we didn't know what we were doing, and every step of the way I kept saying, "When's it going to sound like an album?" "Oh, well, it has to be mixed," and then it was mixed. "Well, when's it going to sound like an album?" "Oh, it has to be mastered," And we had went to the mastering suite, and it still didn't sound like an album. And then the decision came down that they weren't going to release it. So, there we are. We're stuck on a label who won't release our record, and we need representation to get out of the deal. And someone in my band contacted Bill Aucoin, who was the manager of Kiss. And he came down to our loft, and he liked the band, and he said, just because your record didn't work out, that happens a lot. You need the proper producer, and you need the proper songs, So Bill set up some showcases for the band to play in front of labels, and we did one at Trax, which was the showcase venue in Manhattan. And the consensus came back that the guitar player was amazing, and the rest of the band was just not ready. So I got a call from McCoy to come up to the office, and he said, we really believe in you. We'd like to put a band together around you. And by then I knew, the writing was on the wall, and I said, yeah, I'm willing to do that. So I left that band. I moved back to the basement of my parents' house. They had moved by then, and they were living in part of like Forest Hills, Queens. And I was living in the basement, didn't even have a shower or anything. And but we placed an ad in the Village Voice, and that ad ran, it was basically a guitarist looking for everyone, And I started meeting other musicians, and I was like, wow, this is going to be not so easy. And I ran the ad for 2 weeks, and then a coin called me. I said, come up to the office. And I came up, and he said, do you know who Billy Idol is? And I went, I think so. And he said, he's the singer in Generation X, and we've just started managing him. He's moved to New York, and you two guys should meet. And I said, and they played me a couple of things up at the office, and by then I Dancing with Myself, I knew. And then they gave me a copy of the third Generation X record, which was the first record Billy had done with Keith Forsey, his producer. And I thought that was a fucking great record. And I went, oh, wow, this could be really, really good. So about a week later, they arranged for me to meet Billy, and it wasn't like love at first sight. He was certainly the first rock star that I ever really met, and he was super charismatic. But he was coming from the English punk rock thing, which was so far removed from certainly prog rock and all of the bands that I was digging. But he said to me, look, I'm not looking for a punk rock guitar player. If I wanted that, I would have stayed in Generation X. He said, I'm looking for an inventive guitar player. And and then we started to talk, and we realized that we actually did have common musical heroes, but they weren't the ones we expected. They were more like, I loved Lou Reed, and I loved T-Rex and Bowie. So it was really the glam thing. I said, oh, you like that stuff? He went, yeah, I love all that. And he loved the Doors and Creedence and all the kind of rootsy American stuff. And little by little, we just would meet up. And I said, look, even if I don't end up being your guitarist, I know every musician in New York. Let's start putting a band together. And if you don't think I'm the right guitar player, then we'll call it a day for me. But I think I feel in my heart that I can make this work. And then once I knew the bass player, Phil Fight, and Phil knew the drummer that we got. And we started rehearsing, and Billy arranged for Keith to fly into New York. Keith was living in Los Angeles, and he came to our rehearsal. And I guess he told Billy that I'm absolutely the right guitar player. And by then Billy had Bill Aucoin in his ear telling him I'm the guy, and Keith Forsey, and then little by little, each rehearsal I was kind of we'd learn Generation X stuff, and I love that Sex Pistols record, and I kind of got, he wants somebody who's going to be a bit like Johnny Thunders meets inventive guitar playing. And some of the stuff that Billy really loved at that time was Susie and the Banshees, and I had never heard that stuff. And the guitar player who was in the band was great, John McGee. And I started to incorporate all these effects and things, and Billy was really into it. And he went, that's exactly what we need. So we kind of formed this gumbo of musical styles, and then we went off and recorded the first Billy Idol record in Los Angeles.
And how was that recording experience different for you than your previous one?
Entirely different. I mean, I didn't have to look for a musical direction, and I didn't have to be the musical direction, because Billy already knew what he wanted to do. He knew what his identity was. By then, Dancing with Myself and Moni Moni had come out. He had recorded the EP Moni Moni before I met him. So he knew he wanted to combine a bit of guitar rock with dance music. And Keith Forsey, came from the Giorgio Moroder school. He did those Donna Summers records, and so the two of them, I just trusted the two of them. I got in the studio, and I didn't know how to record a guitar or anything, but we had good tunes, and I just kind of like shut up and did what what was suggested to me.
Yeah.
And if I thought I knew where to go instinctively, and and I remember the first time we were in the studio or something, we were recording something, and I brought in a Van Halen record, and I played it for Keith and the engineer, and I said, "That's what a guitar should sound like." And they went, "Wow, all right, how do we do that?" And of course some of the other, I remember I played them. The Scorpions with what's his name, Ulrich Roth, Uli Roth, and I said, that guy, man, that's some of the best sounding guitars I've ever heard. So me and the engineers would work on some of the guitar sounds and stuff, and then the last track we did on that record was White Wedding, and that was the beginning of the Billy Idol sound, really, and we knew, when we go to do the next record, we have to start off as good as White Wedding is, and move forward. And I guess the rest is history.
When that album came out, did it hit right away, or was it a slow build?
No, and actually that record, White Wedding only got to like 56 in the charts as a single. The album never went into the top 40. It kind of hung around, and we went and toured clubs behind it. And that was my first van tour, and staying in crappy hotels, and and it was for some reason, I don't know, we just ended up in in these god awful venues, and playing in the middle of the winter, and everybody was getting sick, and it was like the tail end of punk rock, and people were still into like throwing shit at you on stage and spitting at you, and I was not having it. I was kicking people in the face that spit, and Billy's going, no, they're gobbing. I go, I don't care what you call it. They ain't spitting on me, man. So we toured behind that, but we got better. We got better as a team.
And did that, you bring that into the next record of the kind of going to war on tour together? Did you jump right back into the studio when you got off tour?
Yeah, well, we got I said we should add a keyboard player, and by then we had seen Prince, who had female keyboard player or keyboard players, keyboard player. So Billy wanted a female keyboard player, and we found Judy Dozier. And she actually added a lot to the kind of textures that we could work with the Rebel Yell record. So we went into a little rehearsal place, and I was still living in the basement of my parents' house, and I think my salary was $240 a week I would get from Chrysalis Records or something. But hey, I was a paid musician,
Sure.
So. And we had a deal, we had a deal, and we had some momentum going, and just around that time MTV was starting to pick up, and so we wrote these songs in the rehearsal room, and they were just coming to us like Flesh for Fantasy and Eyes Without a Face and Rebel Yell, and it just seemed to be effortless, and then the decision was made that we would record in New York. We weren't going to go to LA, which was absolutely the right move. And so when we had enough tunes, Keith Forsey came out and booked us into Electric Lady Studios, which was Hendrix's studio. And from the minute we got in there, it was magic. It was like, wow, there was something definitely in the air, and. But the only problem was that Keith is such a stickler for time and rhythm and groove, and he's a drummer. Keith was actually the drummer on White Wedding, and he's on Moni Moni. Oh no, he's on I don't know. He's on a couple of things on the first record. So being a drummer, he's very critical of the drums, and he said, "Nah, we need a different drummer." And so we continued to move the songs along, and we were recorded to a Lindrum, which is drum machine. And in the next studio, was a band called Scandal, and Tommy Price was the drummer for them. He's now been with Joan Jett like 25 years, but we snagged him. We basically stole him, and he's the drummer on the Rebel Yell record. And once he came in, I remember the first time playing with him. He was just a machine, and we had never played with a drummer like that, and it was just so inspiring. And doing all the songs on that first record, cutting them live with Tommy was just incredible. And then we went out on tour with him for 10 months. We toured behind Rebel Yell. And the bass player as well. We had heard the bass on that Alana Miles Black Velvet song, and we went, that's the kind of bass player we need. And someone knew the bass player is a guy out of Toronto called Steve Webster. So he's the guy on Flesh for Fantasy and Rebel Yell, and came up with all those little funk things that were happening. So we had a great rhythm section, great tunes, and it was just by that time doing all my guitar overdubs was just like icing on the cake, and it just was like, we'd have listening parties at the end of the week, and everybody that came by was like, this is incredible.
It's interesting when I first heard that album. There's lots of guitar bursts, and there's no shortage of guitar in a way, but it also felt very restrained, like you held back a lot, but it also created an interesting energy by this restraint, like you're just kind of just about to burst out, but you held it in. Tell me about your style on that.
Well, yeah, I mean that was the whole idea was if we loaded up the album or the guitars were full on the whole time, we would have lost the dance edge of that record and the swing of it and the groove of it. And we didn't want to sound like a hard rock record. And the way we'd even structure the songs, we'd always put 32 bars in the middle, not knowing what we were going to do, but we knew we were going to do dance remixes and things. Yeah. So that enabled us. And sometimes I would go. Perfect example is Eyes Without a Face. We left 32 bars in the middle. Didn't know what we were going to do, and I said, this song is great, but it can't just be a ballad. This is the Idol, And I said, leave me with the song, with the track and the engineer for a couple hours, and I just started putting these guitars on it, a heavy guitar bit in the middle. And Billy and Keith came back, and Billy said, wow, I'm going to rap over it. And I didn't even know what the fuck was rap, And he said, oh, like Grandmaster Flash. And I went, oh, okay, yeah. So that's how we came up with the middle of Eyes Without a Face. But it was not intended to be heavy guitar or anything there. It was always intended to be a dance remix. But lo and behold, it led us to other creative things.
And the guitar solo for Rebel Yell, that's the one with the laser gun. Now, What led you to come up with that idea?
Well, by then we knew that was going to be the title track of the album, and that was the battle cry. And the last thing the backing track was so damn good. It was storming. And I went, wow, what am I going to do on the guitar that's, it's going to be innovative and new? And I can't go Eddie Van Halen on it. It's not, it would be out of character. So I brought in a copy of, there's a Billy Cobham record, and there's a song on it called Quadrant 4, and the guitar player on that is Tommy Bolin. And at one point in that solo, he does this sound effect thing with an Echoplex, and it just takes over the track, and you just go, what the hell was that? and Keith Forsey went, that's exactly the type of thing we need. We need something to take over. And I started mucking around with echo pedals and stuff, and I could replicate the Tommy Bolin thing, but it wasn't my thing. And I took the backing track home on a cassette, and I'm listening to it, and I was still living in the basement of my parents' house. Got the cassette, I'm listening to it, and I had started to collect these Japanese toys, like toy robots and tin toys, and I had this toy ray gun, and I'm just like listening to it, and I start playing, playing the ray gun, and I realized that the ray gun was coming through the pickups of my guitar, and I went, wow, that's a cool effect. But it didn't do it. It just kept one sound. And I said, I had a real good background in building guitar effects. I used to build guitar pedal boards in New York for people to make money. So I took the ray gun apart and I kind of realized, oh, there's a resistor there, and if I vary that with a potentiometer, I know this kind of sounds technical, but it's pretty basic stuff. If I vary it and I just put the knob on the outside, then I can hold down the ray gun and then sweep through the knob, and it's going to go, it's going to get faster and faster and faster. And I did that, and I went, that's it. That's exactly what I want. So next day I bring in the ray gun, and I go to Keith. I go, punch me in on the whatever it was, the seventh bar of the solo. And I played the ray gun thing, and he didn't know what I was doing, and he went, "How the fuck did you do that?" And I went, "It's a $10 toy," and that's how we came about that sound,
And how did you feel? I don't know what it was, 8-10 years later when you saw Eddie Van Halen do the same trick with a drill.
Well, Eddie actually got the drill idea from, I have to give credit to Paul Gilbert, had done the drill thing with, I'm not sure if it's Mr. Big or one of his bands, but Eddie says that he didn't know that Paul Gilbert did the drill thing, but Paul was the first with the drill. Now, I don't know if he was aware of my ray gun thing, but there too, I will say the only person that I've ever seen try and actually take a ray gun, a toy ray gun, and play it through the guitars is John Five, and he doesn't quite understand that you have to alter the ray gun to vary the speed. And I think he gave that. I saw it. Somebody sent me a clip of it, and I kind of laughed. I went, he doesn't quite know what's going on there. But I think he dropped it pretty quick once he met me. And I kind of looked at him like, I know what you've been doing.
And were you able to recreate that live in that solo?
Oh, yeah. I mean, now it's become a shtick because Billy hands me the ray gun as if it's like the golden goose,
right.
Like I'm playing the solo and he kind of gets down on one knee and hands me the treasured ray gun. It's become like a funny thing, because I always say, I've been playing guitar since I was 7.5 and, continue to hopefully get better as a musician and, spend my whole life playing guitar. And the thing people want to know is this toy ray gun thing.
Now, when you went to tour this record, I cannot imagine you were playing shitty little clubs. What was the tour like for it?
Yeah, we started off playing the first show in New York was the Ritz, which was the same club we had played on the previous tour. And we started playing, small, we weren't doing theaters yet. We were doing clubs and maybe 1,200 seaters. And then the album was released, and it once again, Rebel Yell the album itself didn't like enter the top 40 or anything. But then they released Eyes Without a Face and by then we had done the Rebel Yell video. So people were starting to come see us, and it was really smart on our part to do the Rebel Yell video as a live performance thing, not do this kind of concept thing. It was basically just live performance, which was like the best calling card we could have had as a live band. So people were like, oh yeah, these guys are a rock and roll band,
Yeah, right.
And so that got people out to see us. And then once Eyes Without a Face was the single, it went to number 4, and that that sold the album, and then by then the album started to go platinum, then double platinum. Then it pulled along the first record, and they re-released the first album, which then went gold, and it helped the whole Billy Idol catalog.
Now, obviously, at that point, you're moving out of your parents' basement.
No, I didn't have a place. I was on the road, and all my stuff was still at my parents' basement, but I didn't own an apartment or anything. I didn't need one. I knew I'd be on the road for 10 months. So, and then as we got across the country, playing the U.S. and Canada, and then I remember we got to Los Angeles and we played Santa Monica Civic, and that was the first time that we played a bigger place. And then we started to get booked into arenas, and we kind of looked at each other and we go, how many records are we selling? And then when we returned to New York, we played Nassau Coliseum, which is like, it was an arena, and that was like the height for me. That was the height of that tour, was playing an arena in my hometown.
Now, you went a couple years between the next record, and you also have the Top Gun anthem in there too. What happened first, the Top Gun or Whiplash Smile?
Well, we went in to do Whiplash Smile, and a decision was made that we weren't going to use the band, and I couldn't for the life of me understand the logic in that. You had this incredible rhythm section who had just been on a multi-platinum record and toured for 10 months, and you're not going to use them. I was like, what the fuck is that about, So we got in the studio, and there I am, programming the Lindrum and using sequence bass, and those kind of instruments can be great for dance music, but guitars are a live thing, and they don't really sit well. Guitar doesn't sit well with programmed drums because there's no ambience, there's no air. And I found it really hard to make my guitars work, and it was a frustrating record. It got on longer and longer, went on longer and longer, and by then, the pressure was on for us to come up with a follow-up, because now we're the money-making machine for Chrysalis Records, so eyes are on us, whereas before they were never. No one really had any expectations, and now we're this machine. So the pressure got to us. Fair amount of drinking and drugs were involved at that point. But the keyboard player that came into work on Whiplash Smile was Harold Faltermeyer, who was a friend of Keith Forsey's. And he pulled me aside one day and said, I'm working on this new Tom Cruise movie about fighter pilots training school called Top Gun. And he said, let me show you a video. This is the days of VCRs.
Yeah, sure.
So he put the videotape in and showed me, and I said, yeah, whatever you need. And by then, all my gear was set up. And so after a Billy Idol session, we put up the multi-track for Top Gun, and I think it took me all of 2.5 hours. He had the theme, and then we did the solo, and Harold was like, I could see him through the glass just jumping up and down, and I came in and he goes, this is incredible, man. This is gonna be the best thing, and I was like, okay, yeah, whatever, cool. And then lo and behold, 8 months later, 9 months later, I got an envelope in the mail from the Grammy Association saying I'd been nominated for a Grammy, and I called Harold, and he goes, I go, we've been nominated for Grammy. He goes, yeah, we're gonna fucking win that thing, And I go, no, we're not gonna win a Grammy. Come on. He goes, I'm telling you, we're gonna fucking win, So as it turned out, I was living in New York at the time, but we were all, we were on the road promoting Whiplash Smile, and used our live band, and actually the live versions of those songs are much better than the album versions. And so we're out supporting that, and as it turns out, Billy Idol was going to perform on the Grammys. He was nominated for To Be a Lover as Best Male Vocal Performance, and was going to perform on the Grammys. So I was already going to be there. So I went, and our category for Top Gun was announced in the afternoon, and I just went with Harold, and I'm sitting there, and I think the other nominees were like Doc Severinsen, who was the big band leader from The Tonight Show, and Chick Corea and Stanley Clarke, all these kind of heavy duty cats, and so I'm sitting there, and Harold's sitting next to me. He's elbowing me. Yeah, we're gonna win. I'm like, I don't want to be. It's nice to be nominated.
Sure.
I'm on the show anyway. And then they announced it, and we had won. And I went, "You son of a bitch! You were right." And it's just great. A Grammy is, it just means validation. I think more for my parents, being able to call them, long distance and go, "I won a Grammy," and that was like, my mom's crying, and all those guitar lessons paid off, I guess.
And that's speaking a language she can understand. You talk
Yeah,
about, a
exactly.
world tour with Billy Idol. She's not really gonna get it, but a Grammy.
Yeah, and and also, to win one in the afternoon, and then perform on the Grammys that evening. It was an incredible day. Incredible.
And then what happened after the tour with Whiplash Smile? Why did you leave the band?
Well, after I'd won the Grammy, and we were, towards the end of about three-quarters of the way through that record, I was contacted by Warner Brothers, by Ted Templeman, who was the head of A&R but also producer of Van Halen. And Ted said, can I meet you in New York? And we met up, and he said, we'd like to sign you to Warner's to do your own record. It can be whatever you want to do, band or a solo thing or whatever. And I said, cool, but you're gonna have to wait for me to finish this record, and also I'm committed to touring behind it. He said, no problem. But I didn't anticipate that I would leave Billy Idol. I thought that the two would live together, that I would do solo thing as well as Billy Idol. And then about a month later, I got a call from David Lee Roth, and Ted had given him my number, and by then he had left Van Halen, and he said, hey man, I'm going to be in New York, and I'd love to meet up with you, and I met Dave, and he came to my apartment, and we went to lunch, I said, look, I'm in the middle of finishing up this Idol record. I'm not going to leave, and I'm committed to touring behind it. So you would have to wait for me. And by then he already had Billy Sheehan in the band. And he said, I don't think I could wait for you. Have you ever heard of this guy, Steve Vai? And I knew him from the Zappa stuff. I said, he's an incredible guitar player. I said, him and Billy Sheehan would be phenomenal together. So I passed on the Roth gig, and then I after we had finished Whiplash Smile, I got a call. They had already started to record the David Lee Roth record, and were in New York recording. I don't know why I think Dave wanted to record in New York because he wanted to get away from the Van Halen thing. But they were having issues getting a good guitar sound with Steve, and by then, Ted had asked me to meet up with Steve and give him some pointers. So we met up, had a drink, and he was using like carving gear or something. And I called Ted and I said, you're not going to get a good guitar sound out of that stuff. And I said, let me send over all my gear. I'll send you over all my Marshall stuff. So that's all my equipment on that first David Lee Roth record. Yeah. They made that first record is just phenomenal.
It is.
It's just great.
That album holds up immensely. It's surprising how well it holds up.
I agree, and my name's on there. Thank you. So then as I said, I anticipated doing a solo thing, as well as Billy Idol, and then I was unhappy with Whiplash Smile, and on the road with Billy and I weren't getting along. I wasn't, I didn't know where he was going to go with the next record, and then he said he was going to move to Los Angeles, and it's just the two of us weren't communicating, and by then I had Warner Brothers, telling me how fucking amazing I was, and I kind of believed all this. They just signed me, and they didn't give a shit about Billy Idol, so they're like, yeah, you don't really need Billy Idol, come on over here. And they threw a bunch of money at me and gave me a big budget for my album, and I kind of went, fuck this, I'm out of here. So at the end of the Whiplash Smile tour, I left.
And that was to go record Atomic Playboys then?
That's right, yeah, exactly.
And you did that with Beau Hill, right?
I did, yeah. And I had known Beau. He was in a band called Spider that was managed by Aucoin, and Beau was my buddy in the pre-Billy Idol days. When my band had our loft, he used to come rehearse there.
I've had him on the show, and I really liked him. How was doing the sessions?
Well, I became really frustrated because I had looked for a singer for so long. Warner's was waiting for me, and they'd send me tapes of singers, and I was in Germany to to do a benefit show with Harold Faltermeyer. We were going to perform Top Gun, and I was friends with Ian Astbury from the Cult, and Ian called me and he said, "There's this singer that you should get. His name's Ray Gillen, and he's been working with John Sykes." And at that time, so I contacted Ray. He was not getting along with Sykes, and he sent me what was the first Blue Murder record with Ray singing on it. And I went, "Oh, this guy's great. Listen to him," you know?
Yeah.
And if Ian Astbury says somebody's good, they're good, you know? So Ray was in London working with Sykes, and I said, "Just come over to Germany. I'll fly you over. Just come to the hotel. Let's meet and see what's up." And we got on really, really well. I remember we got pissed drunk and we were wrestling. We were just so drunk and we were just wrestling. Or so I don't know how we got into it or something. It was just like funny. And I said, "You look, if you want the gig, you've got it. You know, you've got it." But it was my record deal, and he didn't like that. You know, he wanted the deal to be fully split between himself and myself. I wasn't about to do that. Nobody knew who the fuck Ray Gillen was then. I had built up this name, from the Billy Idol thing, and I wasn't going to split it down the middle. And I guess, Jakey, by then he had left, about a week later he left John Sykes, and I guess Jakey Lee offered him an equal partnership in Badlands, and that's where Ray Gillen went. So I'm still, I go back to New York. I'm still looking for singers. I'm auditioning people. Many people. I won't name names, but people who went on to do records in the '80s, and nobody that was really, people were showing up in Mickey Mouse sweatshirts, and I'm like, I had just come from Billy Idol, the best looking guy in rock and roll, and what the, and someone sent me a tape of Perry McCarty, but it wasn't he was in that band Warrior. It wasn't that. It was some demos that he had done, and it was him singing Steppenwolf songs. And I heard in his voice something reminiscent of Ian Astbury. And I flew him to New York. We started to work on some demos, just like guitar and vocal and stuff. And I thought, oh yeah, I could see this working. He's a really incredibly nice guy, and basically just said, whatever you want to do, I'll do. I'm a fan, and had the right attitude and everything, but really didn't have much recording experience. And we got in the studio, and it was like pulling teeth, and it was. I was used to Billy Idol, who basically you put a mic in front of him and you capture a performance, and then you maybe do it a couple of times, and there's your master vocal. And with Perry, Bo Hill's punching in every word and line by line and syllable by syllable, and I'm going crazy. I'm like, I can't fucking take this. This sounds like a robot. There's no emotion behind it. And Bo's like, I do this with all my bands. And I'm like, I can't fucking believe that you do this, And I said, you can't tell me that guy in Warrant you have to do that with. He said, no, he's a real singer. I go, oh, so telling me this guy is not a real singer. I go, give me the your real opinion. He goes, well, he'll get better, And I was just like, wow. It was really, really tough. I couldn't sit there. So finally I just said to Bo, you cut the vocals. I can't, this is torture for me, because I really like the tunes and the backing tracks. And then I guess, to a certain extent, I took my frustrations out on Bo, and I didn't want him to mix the record, or I told him to, we'd finished the vocals, and to me they sounded, I could hear every punch in and every thing about them. There was just no life to them, and I said, all right, you mix the record, and he mixed 2 songs, and I hated the way it sounded. So I brought in the engineer who had done Rebel Yell, Dave Whitman, to mix the record, and Bo basically walked off the project at that time. And I said, look, you're not an engineer. I didn't hire you to engineer the record. I hired you to, be the producer, and that's, and he goes, yeah, well, that's part of what I'm engineer. And I went, wow, okay. So he left the project, and we finished it off with Dave Whitman, who I think did it with what he was given, The record, it just sounds to me sterile. That's the only word I could say about it, Guitar playing's good. some of the tunes are good. You know, there's some adventurous things, but it just there's no real organic life to it. So I was committed to go out on a club tour for it, and Perry got really nervous performing it live because it was you had to perform what was punched in line by line, and then that was the first time I got up on stage and looked over and Billy Idol wasn't there, and I realized shit, there's nobody to cover that frontman thing. Perry's not that kind of guy, and I said after we did like 6 weeks of that's it. It's over. So, I told everybody in the band, I'm not going to take this. We were slated to go to Japan, and by then I knew Michael Monroe, and Michael's like one of the ultimate frontmen. And I said, I can't bring this band to go on after Michael Monroe. This is not going to happen. So I broke the band up.
And what kind of moves did you make next? Then you're now no Billy Idol, no band. What?
Right.
What did you want to do?
I contacted Michael Monroe. Actually, his label contacted me, or we knew mutual people somehow. The two of us ended up together, and we did a project together. But it was it was one of those things that he knew what he wanted to do, and Michael, although I didn't really know it, really is very much a punk rock guy, and it's he thought I misunderstood what he was about, and he misunderstood what I was about. I guess he thought I was going to be like another Johnny Thunders or something, because of the hair and the glammy look and whatnot. And we started to write tunes, and the tunes were okay. And I said, well, who should we get to produce it? And he said, I'm friends with Sebastian Bach. I love Skid Row. And he played me Slave to the Grind, and I went, it's great. You want to do that? Great. I'm all about it,
Yeah. And
we got Michael Wagner to produce it, and Michael Monroe hated Michael Wagner and started to hate me, started to say, these fucking guitars, too many guitars. And me and Michael Wagner were looking at each other going, what did he expect? He said he wanted it to sound like Slave to the Grind.
Yeah.
And I went, it's not even as heavy as that. It's, So that project eventually it got released in Japan under the name Jerusalem Slim, and I never toured behind it. We had a falling out, and as fate would have it, I was still signed to Warner Brothers, and I was going to okay, I'm going to go back to square one. I'm going to do an instrumental record, because by then Satriani and had success with instrumental music, and so I thought, well, yeah, I'll do that. I'll be the American Jeff Beck or whatever. And Ted Templeman calls me up. He goes, Vince Neil's left Motley Crue, and he wants you to be the guitar player, and he's signed to Warner Brothers. And basically, I had owed Warner Brothers a shit ton of money that they lost on Atomic Playboys, and I said, well, if I do a deal for Vince's record, can you do it? Recoup it against my deal. So it was a way to pay back my record deal. And so I flew out to Los Angeles, and I actually liked where Vince was going with it. I liked Motley Crue. I liked, Kickstart My Heart, and I thought that Dr. Feelgood record was brilliant. So I said, you want to make a record like that? And he said, yeah, I'd love to. And actually making the Vince Neil record was enjoyable on every fucking level. I was being asked to play more guitar, louder guitar, more notes, and play as much as I want. And they gave me that platform, and the producer on it was Ron Nevison, who was really good, and Chris Lord-Alge mixed the record, and the guitars sound great on that record. So that was, but then I realized, oh shit, I've just gone and joined the guy who killed the drummer in Michael Monroe's band. And man, Michael Monroe in the press just slaughtered me. He just called me every book. And I didn't really, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just like, I had done 2 records that really didn't get any recognition. And I knew the Vince Neil record would get some recognition, and by then we were already. They said we were halfway done with the record, and they said, "Oh, you've got the opening slot for Van Halen on their tour," and I already knew, Eddie Van Halen. I was kind of friends with him, so I thought, oh, this is great. This will be great, and it was great up until. The end of the Van Halen tour, and then Nirvana had hit, and the record company wanted everybody to wear flannel shirts and, no eyeliner and all this kind of stuff. And I went, yeah, but you got Vince Neil and Steve Stevens in the band, it's not Pearl Jam, what the fuck do you think you're going to do with us, So the record sold reasonably well, it did about 400,000 copies, but was just shy of going gold, and I don't know what Vince's advance was, but I'm sure it was something that they didn't recoup, and it was seen as a failure.
Yeah, it was an interesting album because it was basically the polar opposite of how you treated guitar with Billy Idol, because it was just guitar everywhere, which was fantastic, and that was really at the time, because that was at the time that you were joining. Vince, we had Richie Kotzen joining Poison, you had Jason Becker joining David Lee Roth, Marty Friedman joining Megadeth. Like, all these brilliant guitar players were all being plucked by singers looking to kind of go that route right before Nirvana crushed it.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. I actually shared the cover of Guitar World with Richie Kotzen, and I didn't know who he was, but they said, "Oh, he's the new guitar player in Poison, and he's really good." And so yeah, there was a lot happening guitar wise, and then somebody played one too many notes and pissed off Kurt Cobain.
So that period then, from the end of Vince Neil till you rejoined with Billy Idol, during the dark years for guitar players of grunge, what did you do in that era?
Well, funnily enough, when I left Billy Idol, it was never like "fuck you" or anything like this. And he had his motorcycle accident in that time, and I called him and said, "Do you want me to fly out to Los Angeles? I'll come out there if you need me." He goes, "No, And I had gone to his first his baby shower, and actually the guitarist that replaced me, Mark Youngersmith, was there. So it was, and we were friendly. It was never, Billy and I never slagged each other off in the press or anything. It was just like, look, I'm looking to do something different, and he's going to move to Los Angeles anyway. I had just gotten my first apartment in New York, and I wanted to stay in New York. So we're going to both do different things. So at the album release party for Vince Neil's record, I invited Billy Idol. I said, you want to come down and I've done this record with Vince Neil, and Billy came down, and there was a couple of tracks on it that I wanted him to hear, and we're talking, and he goes, you're still fucking great, mate. He's still a great guitar player, and then after so I did the Vince Neil tour, and then the label pulled out, and then things went south. We started playing, smaller and smaller places, and it just was like, So I picked up the phone. I called Idol. I said, man, I think I'm ready to, if you're interested. And he had by then done Cyberpunk, and which was not successful, and I think he was looking to kind of get back to the Billy Idol thing, and his true self. And I said, when I'm done with this, I'll come out to Los Angeles. I'll come out. Let's hang out. And I did. And I just stayed in hotels for a while. And we just did some writing and stuff. And he was going through difficulties with Chrysalis Records. They were about to fold, and he got folded. His deal got folded into Capitol. We ended up over at Capitol trying to record a record with a producer that was not the right guy, and that fortunately ended up being shelved. And then a little ways after that, we got contacted by MTV to do Storytellers, and and we thought, oh, that's a really interesting thing because it'll give us a chance to play our back catalog, but in a new way. And it was, funnily enough, it's exactly what Page and Plant did because they went off and did their stuff acoustically. And when you've got two guys who have a history together and maybe, they don't want to just retread it because it feels like a nostalgia act, you kind of go, oh, wow, let's try this a different way. And I brought in a percussionist buddy of mine, and we did like flamenco interpretations of songs, and it was really fun. It was so much fun. And that was the first trip we took back to New York together, and we passed all the old haunts that we hung out in, and we really kind of rekindled our friendship over that stay in New York, and it was just a way to get back to what we were doing, but in a different way.
And you've been touring and recording really much ever since.
Yeah, I mean, we've continued to tour, and Billy's still got such a massive following in Europe, and now, I mean, Germany has always been like, he's never stopped playing arenas in Germany, and the English audience started coming back around to what we were doing, and little by little we play these other countries that we had never been to before, like Russia and all these Eastern European countries, and we just kept doing that, but always with the intention of doing a record, of doing a new record, and eventually he got out of his deal with Chrysalis, and we did Devil's Playground. I think that was the first record that we had done then.
And what was it like being back in the studio again, properly doing a proper Billy Idol album? Was it just like old times?
No, that was a really difficult record for me. That was a really, really difficult one because there were people convinced that Billy Idol shouldn't be Billy Idol anymore.
Oh.
So much so that there was actually talk of releasing a record under a different name. And I was like, once again, what Einstein thinks that's a good idea? It's Billy Idol. I mean, it's like, there's not too many iconic singers, I mean, he's like the Ozzy of punk rock and roll, to me, at least, that's the way I see it. He's this kind of iconic figure, you know?
Yeah, totally.
And I had the hindsight, I have all this history with Billy of going from nothing to playing arenas, and I've seen it. I know what it should be. I know what it feels like when it's right. And when all these other people were like getting in his ear about what he should do, it was really frustrating for me. So I wasn't the key co-songwriter on Devil's Playground, and the decision was made to do more of a rock record, a hard rock record. And I went, that by design is a mistake because Billy Idol's primary audience is female to begin with, and it's like Bon Jovi. Guys go because there's hot chicks there, and and girls love it because he's like Elvis to them. I mean, he's still to them like Elvis. He is my generation's Elvis Presley. And I went, you're going to deny his core audience, which is females, by doing this hard rock record. I went, I'd love to play hard rock music. I've done it. I've done with Vince Neil or whatever. I can play to that audience and shred as well as the best of them. That's not what Billy Idol records are about. Well, we proceeded to go ahead and do that record. I wasn't, heavily involved in the songwriting or the arranging, or even, there's 4 songs that I co-wrote with Billy, and I think they're the strongest on the record, and that's just my opinion. But I felt that the album was very one-dimensional, and there's some dudes who like Slipknot that maybe like it, but Billy's female audience doesn't dig it. They don't dig that record, and rightly so. And the record didn't do that well. It didn't get the attention. That's the thing about it, because there was no singles on it, and it was like there's a Billy Idol record out there, but it's not quite, and he was co-writing with Brian Tichy, who was the drummer, and all Brian seemed to want to do is rewrite Rebel Yell or something, and I was like, we've already done Rebel Yell, and we got Rebel Yell. it sold 5 million copies. Why do that? It was like a really tough time, but I stuck it out, and eventually things got a little personal between myself and Brian, and he left the band, and Billy and I, it's kind of our relationship got stronger at that point, and he went, you know what, you were right, mate, you were right. It wasn't the right record. And I said, look, I'm not against having other people collaborate. That wasn't the problem. It was just the energy, or the energy had gone out of the band, and I said, look, my best friend is this guy Billy Morrison. He's a rhythm guitar player. He's in this band Camp Freddy. I guest with them all the time, and Dave Navarro's in that band, and you would love him. And I said, not only that, he's English, and he's also from your hometown. And Billy went, rhythm guitar player? And I said, just let's have him come down. Let's have him come down one rehearsal and see what you think. And it worked like a charm. It was another positive personality, and I got my best friend in the band, and I get to play some of the by then I was like 30 years of playing the same guitar parts, so if I add a rhythm guitar player, I can play some of the parts I've never played on the records, some of the overdubs, and the band started to sound fuller. And Billy Morrison is a very positive thinking guy. Nothing's going to get him down. And so we started to become this little team, and we started to write songs with Morrison, and we were having fun. That's all we were thinking about. We weren't thinking about an album or anything. We were just having fun. And we would tour, and the band was better live because Morrison's really good he's good stage presence, and we're all feeling good, and we're coming up with these songs. And then Idol says, he comes in one day, he goes, I'm going to write my autobiography, and I want this record to be autobiographical in nature. And we all went, oh, great, because Morrison used to sneak in and see Generation X as a kid, and he grew up in Billy's hometown. He knows that English side of it, okay, and I know the American side when Billy moved to New York. So we started to write this kind of semi-autobiographical music. And then Trevor Horn's name came up, and he's a producer I've always wanted to work with. I always thought he'd be the right producer for Billy Idol. He's like an English producer. He's a dance guy. He's kind of similar to Keith Forsey, and we sent off tunes to him, and he responded really positively and went, yeah, I want to do this record, and I know what to do with it. And I will say this has been the easiest Billy Idol record to write, record. It's been the most enjoyable, and there's a reason for that, because everyone wants it to be a Billy Idol record, a real Billy Idol record. So we're all really excited about it.
It sounds like this is the first record since Rebel Yell that you're really excited by then.
Absolutely, yeah. And there were a lot of similarities about it. We went to England to record, and we only had 2.5 weeks to record all of the vocals and the guitars. And Trevor Horn played bass, and then he hired a drummer that he worked with, a guy who plays on all the Seal records. So they said, okay, well, there's an apartment across the street from the studio. How about you and Billy Idol stay in the apartment? And I went, wow, we're going to get thrown right back into if there's any, if we have any differences or whatever, we can't get away from it.
Yeah.
But as it turned out, the vibe was so good, and he has been so wonderful to work with, and complimentary and inspirational, and and we just had a fucking great time over there, and we couldn't believe, we've never recorded anything in 2.5 weeks. I don't think we've ever done one song in 2.5 weeks. And we came away with 11 tracks. So and it was just the studio we recorded at used to be Island Records, and all the Bob Marley records were done there, and Blind Faith, and Traffic, and early Genesis, and Stairway to Heaven was recorded there. So it's like this, everything about it was right, and that's what I mean. It felt like Rebel Yell because when we recorded that, we were at Electric Lady Studios, which is Jimi Hendrix studio. So when you're in these like hallowed rooms, you pull the best shit out of you, you know, because you're like aware of the history.
And what kind of touring plans do you have for it?
Yeah, we head to Europe next week, and then we do 5 weeks in Europe, and then come back and do the States and Canada, and those are all theater dates. And then we head to Australia and New Zealand, and I just found out that Cheap Trick is going to be opening, which is, I've known those guys. I just love Cheap Trick. I mean, you know, this is great. I mean, to me, that's not an opening act. It's just, we're playing with Cheap Trick, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
They're just fucking great. And then after that, I think there's talk of South America and Japan. And, then, you know, who knows where the record will be. I just found out that Billy's autobiography is number 13 on the New York Times bestseller list this week. So there's a really big renewed interest in having this record, and the vibe and it just, you know, when something's right in the air, you know, and we're all like smart enough to enjoy it now.
That was Steve Stevens. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed talking to him. His new album with Billy Idol comes out on Tuesday the 21st. That's it for this week. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes or SoundCloud, and I'll see you next Monday.
The devil's house in the shape of a chapel. You hit the knife in the core of an apple. Burn me, try to hurt me, try to hit me when my back was turning. I saw you wave when the shadows were growing. You're talking straight, but your colors are showing. Burn me, try to hurt me, try to get me when my head was turning. You are the